Carl Jung uncovered a truth so piercing that it can unravel everything you thought you understood about empaths and love. If you are someone who feels life at full volume, who absorbs others' emotions the way lungs draw in air, and you've ever poured your heart into someone you could never fully reach, what you experienced was not merely heartbreak. Jung revealed that this kind of love initiates a rupture in the psyche so deep, so archetypal, it cracks open sealed vaults of the soul that most people never even know exist. This isn't a matter of being overly sensitive. It is not about loving too much. It is about a rare psychic configuration, a distinct architecture of perception and feeling that Jung devoted years of study to. For the empath, impossible love is not just a wound. It is an initiation. It does not just hurt, it transforms. When an empath loves someone they cannot have, Jung found that something profound occurs at the level of the soul, what he described as psychological fragmentation, a disintegration of the known self, followed by sacred reassembly. The empath does not simply endure rejection. They are shattered by it. Their inner world explodes into 1,000 hidden shards, each one revealing a piece of self long buried beneath childhood silence, emotional absorption, and unspoken caretaking. This fragmentation is not a failure. It is the beginning of individuation. Because within the breaking, the empath confronts long-lost parts of themselves, those they disowned to survive, to belong, to feel needed. In his private journals, Jung called this the empath's curse, not because they love too deeply, but because they become the very emotions the other person cannot process. The empath doesn't just feel for someone, they feel like them. They become an emotional vessel, receiving the projections, the longings, the grief, the rage, the unspoken fears that the other cannot bear to face. And when that person pulls away, when they vanish or withdraw, the empath is left with more than absence. They are left holding echoes of pain that were never theirs to begin with. Most therapists might call this enmeshment. They might say you've lost yourself, that you need firmer boundaries, that this is classic codependency. But Jung saw something deeper. He knew that empaths who love in this way are not dissolving into another. They are undergoing what he described as transpersonal love, a temporary merging of psychic fields where the empath's consciousness intertwines with another's in ways so intimate, so unguarded, that it bypasses the defenses most people never lower. In this merging, the empath touches both the sublime beauty and the unbearable cost of human connection without shields. This is not dysfunction. This is alchemy. And it is the beginning of something that can either destroy you or liberate the parts of you that were never meant to stay hidden. Have you ever noticed that when some people leave, it doesn't feel like a goodbye? It feels like an amputation, as if a part of your soul was carried away in their silence, and no amount of logic can explain why their presence still lingers in your bloodstream like a memory that refuses to fade. You wake up with their thoughts in your chest. You feel their unrest inside your bones. You sense their confusion like it's your own. And despite all the time and space that's passed, a thread remains, tense, invisible, but unbroken. Carl Jung would not dismiss this as fantasy. He would name it what it is, a deep empathic entanglement, where your soul's boundaries are so fluid that you become a vessel for another's unspoken suffering. For the empath, love is not merely emotional, it is energetic. It bypasses the surface rituals of affection and dives straight into the unconscious realm where few dare to tread. Most people learn to love with protective walls. They build emotional fortresses to guard their hearts, to avoid exposure. But empaths? They walk into love with their entire soul exposed. And when they love someone who cannot receive that love, someone emotionally unavailable, psychologically guarded, or carrying trauma they refuse to face, it's not just disappointment they feel, it's fragmentation. It's a psychic rupture that splits the empath open, revealing inner chambers of unresolved pain they didn't even know existed. Yet here lies the paradox Jung found most profound. This shattering is not a collapse. It is an initiation. It is the violent but sacred beginning of what he called transcendent individuation, the painful birth of a more complete self through the wound of impossible love. If you are someone who has loved like this, if you are still haunted by the energy of someone who disappeared without closure, I invite you to stay present. This is not your destruction. This is your awakening. Jung observed that certain souls, especially those carrying the archetype of the wounded healer, possess what he termed permeable soul boundaries. This means your nervous system isn't defective, it is evolutionary. It registers not only your pain, but the emotional vibrations of those you've connected to at the level of the unconscious. Their abandonment activates your inner mirror. You begin to feel not only your grief, but their avoidance, their longing, their shame, their resistance to love. All of it floods into your system like a storm you didn't ask for, but somehow know how to survive. Jung documented countless cases where empaths, even without contact, could feel the thoughts, dilemmas, and emotional patterns of those they once loved. This isn't necessarily mysticism, it's sensitivity without armor. It's the rare ability to tune into frequencies others have long suppressed or forgotten how to hear. And this is what makes your pain so unique, because you didn't just fall in love. You saw someone's soul and let it into your own. You held a mirror to their wounds before they were ready to see them. And when they pulled away, you remained, still holding their sorrow, still carrying their silence. But there's something else Jung whispered to those who walked this path. He called it soul recognition, a moment when your unconscious meets another and recognizes a familiar wound. It's why the attraction felt so deep, so inexplicable, so spiritually charged. They were not your completion, they were your revelation. Their inability to meet you where you stood showed you where you still abandon yourself in the name of love. That is the ache you feel now. But that ache is sacred. It is the precise doorway through which you begin the journey back to yourself. So if you've ever asked, why do I still feel them? The answer is, because you were never meant to just love them. You were meant to find yourself through what their absence activated. And now you're finally beginning to see what that love was always trying to teach you. But this is where Jung's insight takes us into sacred territory, where heartbreak is no longer merely personal but archetypal. The person you loved, or the one who appeared in your life and refused to meet you fully, was never a coincidence. According to Jung, the empath does not simply fall for someone unavailable. They are magnetized, unconsciously and with great psychic precision, toward a soul whose distance echoes the hidden emotional distance they still carry within themselves. You gave your whole being to someone you couldn't reach, because, deep down, there is a part of you you've never truly reached either. And in this mirroring, the impossible love becomes a revelation, a painful illumination of the ways you've withheld from yourself the very devotion you so freely give to others. It shows you how you've made your own heart a refugee while trying to build a home inside someone who has long since locked their emotional doors. Jung observed that many empaths are not born this way by accident, but shaped by childhoods where emotional sensitivity was a matter of survival. If you grew up in an unpredictable home, where love was inconsistent or earned, you likely became hyper-attuned to the moods of those around you. You learned to scan the emotional landscape for signs of danger or withdrawal. You mastered the art of emotional translation, decoding body language, silences, and subtle shifts long before anyone spoke a word. This early vigilance sculpted your empathic gifts, yes, but it also carved a wound that taught you to betray your own needs in order to keep peace. A wound that convinced you love means losing yourself, so no one else has to feel discomfort. And when an impossible love enters your life, it reactivates that ancient code. Your nervous system recognizes the familiarity of emotional chasing and confusion. And what follows is not just heartbreak, it is a breaking open of the core wound you've carried your whole life. Jung named this descent the dark night of the empathic soul. It is not sadness, it is spiritual disintegration. Not everyone enters this realm because not everyone loves without protection. But for the empath, the pain is not surface level. It is existential. The love you gave collapses into silence, and in that silence, every identity you once held, the healer, the giver, the one who understands, dissolves. When they leave, they don't just walk away from your life. They walk out with the part of you that believed your love could heal, could hold, could keep someone from disappearing. And in that moment, the pain feels too large for the timeline. It doesn't matter if it was days or years. The soul doesn't measure connection in minutes. It measures in resonance. It measures how deeply your inner world was rearranged by their presence. What Jung found in this aftermath is as harrowing as it is holy. Empaths, he said, do not simply grieve, they awaken. And this awakening is not soft. It is not poetic. It is a violent psychological separation from the illusion that love alone can rescue. He called it forced individuation because when someone impossible disappears, the mirror you once used to see your worth shatters. You are left with no one to chase, no one to soothe, no one to pour into. And so, at last, you are left with yourself. It is here, in this unbearable solitude, that you begin to uncover who you are when you are not performing love, who you are when you are not the one doing the holding. This ego death, as Jung described, is the necessary death of the empath who survived by giving everything. And from these ashes arises the birth of the sovereign empath, the one who no longer abandons themselves in the name of love. But most do not complete this transformation. The pain of exposure is too raw, too destabilizing. They flee into new distractions, quick relationships, or even spiritual bypassing to avoid the real work. But for those who endure, who sit in the rubble and do not rush to rebuild, a deeper magic begins. These are the empaths Jung revered. They emerge able to feel everything without drowning, to love without losing, to sense another's pain without claiming it as their own. And they offer their energy not from depletion but from abundance. Their gift is no longer entangled in sacrifice. It becomes a sacred service rooted in self-awareness. This wisdom cannot be inherited. It cannot be borrowed. It must be lived. It must be earned. Through the crucible of loving someone who could not stay and surviving the death of the self you once were, the self that still believed love meant disappearing. Jung called this not a failure of love, but the beginning of real love, the kind that includes you. There is a reason you cannot simply move on, no matter how much time has passed or how many techniques you've tried. Every attempt to forget feels like a quiet betrayal of something sacred within you. Jung understood this well. He observed that when an empath loves deeply, they do not just create a memory, they create what he called energetic cords, invisible but psychically real threads that bind their emotional body to another's. These cords, he believed, are not metaphors. They are real psychological structures embedded within the collective unconscious, currents of energy that continue to vibrate between two souls long after their physical connection dissolves. And for the empath, this explains why you still feel them, why their energy seems to live inside you as if it never left. When an empath loves, the bond goes beyond personality or behavior. It is not based on logic, compatibility, or timing. It is an intertwining of essences. You connect not only with who they are, but with who they are becoming, with the deepest layers of their being. This is why certain songs or places ignite a visceral reaction in your body. It's why you wake in the early hours of the morning with a sudden rush of emotion that has no clear origin, yet you somehow know it belongs to them. It's why, despite no contact, you sense when their thoughts brush against your own. Jung found that empaths who love this way often experience what he termed psychic bleeding, a continued emotional resonance in which the other person's state of mind subtly influences yours, regardless of distance or silence. It is not an obsession, it is sensitivity without separation. You are still tied to someone who may have long since moved on externally, but inwardly the cord hums with unfinished energy. This kind of attachment can be excruciating, precisely because the world does not understand it. People may tell you to move on, to distract yourself, to cut the cord and forget. But Jung warned that avoidance does not dissolve an empathic bond. It only drives it deeper into the unconscious. The only path to release is through conscious transformation. You cannot sever what was sacred. You must integrate it. Jung taught that the cord must be acknowledged, honored, and ultimately transformed, not into absence, but into awareness. You must thank it for what it revealed about your capacity to love, even as you reclaim the energy you've been unconsciously sending through it. He developed a practice for this, a meditative process he called cord consciousness. Instead of violently cutting ties, which only creates more psychic wounding, Jung encouraged empaths to sit in stillness and visualize the connection as a thread of light, once draining, now golden. Through this inner ritual, you begin to shift the energy, no longer a channel of loss, but a living symbol of gratitude. You bless the other person's path, releasing your need to walk beside them. You allow the connection to remain, not as a source of pain, but as a sacred remembrance of what your soul once recognized in another. In this act, you do not lose love, you free it. Over time, this practice gives rise to what Jung described as sovereign boundaries. It is the capacity to remain deeply empathic without becoming entangled. You learn to feel connection without surrendering your vitality. You begin to realize that love does not require ownership, and presence does not require proximity. The cord you formed with your impossible love was never a punishment. It was a revelation. It showed you that you possess a rare and holy capacity to see another's essence and to love them not for what they give you, but for who they truly are. The pain you've carried did not arise because you loved too deeply. It came because you offered that depth to someone unable to receive it. Your love was never wrong. It was simply ahead of its time, searching for resonance in a heart that could not yet hold it. And when you finally understand this, the cord begins to shift from burden to blessing. You stop waiting for them to return your energy and start reclaiming it as your own. That is when true healing begins, the moment you whisper into the silence, releasing. Because naming what you're ready to let go of is the first act of reclaiming your power and the first step toward remembering that love, at its highest level, was never meant to cage you. It was meant to set you free. Carl Jung uncovered a truth about empaths and trauma bonding that modern psychology is only beginning to grasp in its full depth. He observed that when an empath falls in love with someone emotionally unavailable, the pain they feel is not merely heartbreak, it is an awakening of ancient wounds buried in the body. Jung called this phenomenon compounded soul wounding, a psychological and spiritual process in which the rejection of the present moment reopens every unresolved memory of abandonment you have ever endured. What feels like a single heartbreak is, in truth, the echo of 1,000 silent heartbreaks you never had the safety to process. The impossible love doesn't just hurt you for who they were. It reactivates every moment in your past when love was withheld, when affection had to be earned, when your presence was met with indifference or control instead of warmth. That is why this kind of pain feels so immense, so disproportionate to the relationship itself. You're not just grieving this person. You're grieving every version of yourself that had to shrink to be loved. You're mourning the child who believed that love required constant proving. You're feeling, often for the first time, the weight of every moment you internalized the lie that your tenderness was too much or your needs were too inconvenient. Jung's work with empaths revealed a haunting pattern. Those who grew up with emotionally distant or unpredictable caregivers learned to monitor the emotional climate of their surroundings as a survival strategy. You became a silent observer, reading subtle shifts in tone, gesture, and mood. You learned that your safety depended on staying attuned to the needs of others before they were even expressed. If your mother's silence felt like a storm approaching, you softened your voice, adjusted your behavior, and tried to keep her calm. If your father's disapproval carried the threat of withdrawal, you worked harder, performed better, and became whoever he needed you to be. These adaptations, what Jung called protective empathy, were not weaknesses. They were the brilliant survival codes of a child who learned to love by anticipating danger. But what begins as survival in childhood becomes suffering in adulthood, because those early adaptations shape your inner template for love. Somewhere deep in your unconscious, love becomes synonymous with effort. Connection becomes a performance. Affection becomes a reward you must earn. And when an unavailable person enters your life, something ancient inside you recognizes the pattern, not as a warning, but as an invitation. Jung would say that your psyche sees in this person the perfect opportunity to rewrite the unfinished story of your past. They mirror the very energy of your early caregivers, present enough to awaken hope, distant enough to recreate uncertainty. They give just enough warmth to keep you believing, yet never enough consistency to feel secure. And so your empathic system, trained from childhood to win love through self-abandonment, ignites again, working tirelessly to heal them, to understand them, to prove that love can reach them if only you feel deeply enough. But Jung's greatest insight for empaths was this: you were never trying to heal them. You were unconsciously trying to heal yourself. You were trying to rewrite the moment in childhood when love felt conditional. You believed that if you could love someone enough to make them stay, you could finally redeem that lost version of you who wasn't chosen. The impossible love became a theater for your deepest unhealed story, and you, without realizing it, became both the actor and the audience of your own unresolved pain. Jung called this repetition compulsion, the psyche's desperate attempt to complete what was once interrupted. Life keeps handing you the same lesson until your soul no longer needs it. And the lesson, Jung said, is both simple and shattering. You cannot love someone into wholeness. You cannot feel someone into healing. You cannot understand why someone would choose you. The same empathic powers that once protected you as a child can imprison you as an adult when you use them to earn love instead of receiving it. The transformation begins when you finally accept that no amount of compassion will awaken someone who is not ready to awaken. That realization feels like the world collapsing because it dismantles the illusion that love can save everyone. But that collapse is sacred. It is the breaking of the old self, the one who believed salvation lay in fixing others. When you allow yourself to feel the rage beneath your empathy, the grief beneath your patience, the exhaustion beneath your hope, something shifts. You begin to see that your pain is not punishment, it is liberation. Jung taught that empaths must grieve not only the person, but the fantasy that their love could make another soul ready. This grief is not weakness, it is alchemy. It burns through illusion until only truth remains. And when the ashes settle, you are left standing before the only love that ever truly mattered, the love you withheld from yourself while trying to earn it from the world. That is the moment your real healing begins, the moment you stop waiting for someone to come back and start returning to yourself. There's a paradox buried deep inside the empath's soul, and Jung gave it a name that still echoes with quiet pain, the gift-curse paradox. It is the core reason you've struggled in relationships, not just with the one who broke you open, but with many who came before. You carry within you one of the rarest capacities in all of human relating, the ability to see beneath the surface, to feel another's soul, not as a concept, but as a living, breathing essence. You do not recoil from their wounds. You recognize them. You cradle them. You sense how their scars were shaped and where their inner child still flinches. This level of love is cathedral-like in its depth. It isn't ordinary, it's spiritual. But this sacred gift becomes your greatest burden when it is extended without discernment, when you offer soul-level reverence to people who are only equipped for surface-level contact. When your emotional cathedral is open to someone who is still building their emotional shelter out of sand, that is the cruelty of impossible love. It didn't just break your heart, it broke the illusion that love alone could awaken someone who refuses to meet you there. You gave your all. They gave you fragments. You revealed the most intimate chambers of your being to someone who left you waiting in the entryway of theirs, never fully inviting you in, yet never completely letting you walk away. Jung observed this emotional starvation pattern in empaths. You learn to survive on crumbs, and when someone hands you a slightly larger piece, your heart floods with gratitude and calls it a feast. You begin to mistake inconsistency for mystery, emotional turbulence for passion, and small gestures for devotion. The truth is hard, but liberating. You were not in love with reality. You were in love with possibility, with who they could become, not who they consistently chose to be, with the rare glimpse of their higher self, not with the version of them that met you daily. Jung warned that this distortion, while beautiful in its intention, becomes a form of self-abandonment, because your gift of seeing someone's potential, if not anchored in truth, turns into a permission slip for them to keep falling short. You've called your boundaries compassion. You've called your pain patience. You've stayed in emotional scarcity and labeled it unconditional love. That's why Jung created a practice called mirror reversal. He would sit with empaths and gently ask them to imagine what it would feel like to turn all that love, patience, and understanding inward, to hold themselves with the same tenderness they so instinctively extend to others. And almost always what followed was discomfort, deep resistance, even grief. Because for empaths, loving themselves often feels like betrayal of their nature, of their role, of their story. But Jung insisted this was not betrayal. It was the beginning of coming home. You see, the impossible love didn't just happen to you. It happened for you. It shattered the pattern of defining your worth by how deeply you could love others. And it initiated a sacred reversal, an invitation to begin measuring your worth by how gently, honestly, and fiercely you could love yourself. Every minute you spent trying to decode their signals was a missed chance to listen to your own truth. Every ounce of hope you invested in their evolution was energy you could have used to evolve your relationship with your own enoughness. The real tragedy wasn't their unavailability. It was how long you've mirrored it by being unavailable to yourself. Jung would ask you, softly but directly, what would your life become if you directed even half the empathy you offer others into your own soul? Who would you be if you stopped waiting to be chosen and became the one who chooses you? If this question stirs something in you, write "I choose me" in the comments. Sometimes the most profound act of healing isn't letting someone go. It's finally holding yourself. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.